just to mix it up a little bit, I might start, Senator Sterle. Yes. Oh, well, I won't be long. I just have a couple of questions for you on the changes to the Class E airspace, particularly around Townsville, though of course, you know, this applies more broadly around the country. Can you talk me through on what basis that decision was made?
Senator Jason Harfield, Airservices Australia. Senator, no decision has been made yet. What we put out for consultation earlier this year was as a result of what we're seeing in the airspace as an arrangement of managing sort of the day-to-day risk, where last year we saw a number of accidents in that type of airspace, which is currently what we would call Class G airspace. As well
specifically as, whereabouts?
There was an accident at Mangalore, a mid-air collision in February last year, as well as seeing the change in traffic profile as a result of COVID. We've seen that airspace, which is now currently Class G, up and down the east coast of Australia, become busier than what it once was. To take an example, is Ballina Airport is now 50% higher in traffic than it was pre-COVID as a result of it. And so that changing risk type got us to looking at how can we enhance our services that we provide to better protect all of the airspace users. So earlier this year we put out a proposal to lower Class E airspace up and down what we call the J-curve, which ostensibly is the east coast. And we put that out for consultation. During that time, we've got over 1,000 pieces of feedback, and we've taken that on board and tuned that proposal. And last week we put it out again for further consultation on the revised proposal for industry. And we will do that over the next 4 to 5 weeks. And then after that consultation, then we'll take that on board and see what the proposal will be before we submit it to CASA for approval.
And what is the revised proposal? The
revised proposal is lowering Class E, but instead of down to above ground level, it's above mean sea level. I can refer you to a website which we can provide on notice, which has got all the details of the revisions, as well as the changes and tracking what the consultation that we received and how we've addressed that consultation.
Right. I've had a significant amount of contact around this and not positive. Yep. So I'll look forward to a demonstration of how this is going to maintain activity, particularly in general aviation, and what is the demonstrated safety case, because there was also another case of, anyway, I have committed to not holding you up too long. I am very interested in this topic and hope you'll include me in your advice as to when you're prepared to go to CASA.
Absolutely, Senator, and I will admit that some of the feedback that we got was as a result of the way that we initially positioned in some of our wording. It did sort of give the impression a decision had been made when that was not the intention at all. However, this is what we're going through the process of making sure that we've taken on board over 1,000 pieces of feedback. We're now back out again, and we'll make sure that you see that. And then after that consultation, and then when we get to where we want to finalise, we will put that out for comment as well.
Terrific, thank you. I now have some questions. And I'm going to refer to a document, so I'm going to ask that be tabled, please. There should be enough copies for all the senators who are here. And I ask these on behalf of Senator Dunningham from Tasmania. Yep. So he's asked questions about Airservices Australia response to a risk review of Hobart Airport undertaken by CASA in June 2019. His understanding is that CASA undertook this review due to Hobart's air traffic levels continuing to exceed government-mandated safety triggers. In response, Airservices lodged a submission to CASA's review proposing to upgrade Hobart's air traffic control service from Class D to Class C to provide a radar service similar to services provided at all other major and capital city airports. I'm going to refer you to page 4 of tabled document 1. The Airservices submission, which summarises the benefit of this proposal. And while you have a look at it, I'll just quote from it. Yankee Mike Hotel Bravo, Hobart Airport, has continued to exceed the Class C airspace review criteria threshold for passenger numbers listed in the Australian Airspace Policy Statement 2018 since the last airspace review undertaken in 2017. Currently, it exceeds the 1 million passenger trigger by more than 1.7 million passengers at 2.7 million. To ensure there are no impacts on safety at Hobart, this proposal seeks to proactively address any chance that unmitigated growth could have on safety. To achieve this, Airservices proposes changes to the aerodrome approach and airspace system to provide a capability to deliver a Class C aerodrome and a Class C approach service at Hobart and surrounding airspace. The submission goes on to describe at length the safety and efficiency benefits and value to the aviation industry of this proposal, including increased safety for airspace users, improved detection of and response to safety critical deviations and breaches, improved efficiency of Tasmanian traffic flow, reducing delays and cost to industry, and more flexibility to provide services to essential first responder services such as police, firefighting and medical emergency evacuation flights. I understand, or Senator Duniam understands, that CASA accepted Airservices' proposal and recommended that it progress it by December 2020. I now refer you to tabled document 2, which contains correspondence between Airservices Australia and CASA from November 2020 referring to this recommendation. And in it, Airservices says the Hobart Class C initiative no longer aligns with its airspace modernisation plan and the timeframe has been delayed due to COVID. The correspondence concludes with an agreement with CASA to further delay further consideration of the Class C proposal till December 23, another 3 years. So the situation seems to be that the proposal, which would deliver significant safety improvements, which is bound by the Airservices Act to consider as highest priorities, provide a financial benefit to Australian airline industry at a critical time. The proposal would modernise and allow more aircraft to Hobart Airport when demand is increasing and tourism needs to recover, and yet Airservices and CASA are delaying this important initiative. So the questions are, what would be the financial cost to Airservices of implementing the Class C proposal in Hobart?
Senator, the delay due to COVID and resetting to about 2023 is aligned with the fact that there's only 20% of the traffic that once was there prior to COVID, which allows us to work through this with everything else that we are changing to ensure that we can get the Class C airspace in prior to the traffic returning to the levels pre-COVID. So it's not like we're putting it off, we've just rescheduled it as a result of the fact is that we're at 20% traffic to what we once were.
Right, so is it not the case that Hobart Airport was recently found to be the Australian airport recovering most strongly in terms of passenger numbers?
Passenger numbers, but not necessarily in activity numbers. Yes, it is responding better than other places around Australia. However, it's nowhere near once it was prior to COVID.
So what percentage would you say of passenger numbers?
Passenger numbers, I can't off the head because we really work in activity numbers or movement numbers. We can trace back historically, but we're probably around about, I don't know if Mr Logan has it, but near on about 30% of once traffic there was. Because the majority of traffic was regular public transport, airline traffic.
So I'm putting it to you that Hobart Airport has almost reached the same volume of flights as pre-COVID-19 levels, now supplemented by regular international flights.
Senator, that may be the case, so I need to take that on notice.
Thank you. With the demand for air travel to Hobart likely to return strongly, wouldn't now be the perfect time to implement a new air traffic control initiative?
Yes, it would be, Senator.
I understand Airservices is currently undertaking a post-implementation review of Hobart flight paths. Again, wouldn't this be the ideal time to look at all the options, particularly this one which Airservices and CASA have both agreed offers multiple benefits?
Yes, it is, Senator.
So will Airservices reconsider its decision to deprioritise implementation of its Class C initiative for Hobart Airport?
Yes, Senator.
Well, wasn't that quick? Thank you very much. Over to you, Senator Sterle.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr Hartfield. I just want to go to the broader report. A couple of questions around that, and I'll take your last paragraph, or one of the paragraphs, last paragraphs on your website, talking about the review team also found there was a distinct areas of culture that require immediate action and reform, including the levels of bullying and harassment. So one of the recommendations from the Broderick report was the creation of the Safe Place team. How's that gone, Mr Hartfield?
Senator, that was established in late last year and is now up and running.
Can you walk us through it? Who's on it? What do? Do they meet regularly?
Safe Place is a we'll call it a unit, a group of staff that handle investigations as well as reviewing that is independent of normal line management for people to report to in a confidential manner, because one of the findings that came out of the Broderick review is people were not confident in reporting through the management chains, and so that is there to do the investigations, etc., under the Code of Conduct or anything that may be referred to them.
And have they done any investigations since their formation?
They have done a number of investigations, Senator.
And can you walk us through No Names, No Pack Drill? The
There's been a range of to give you the exact numbers, I'd have to take that on notice, but there have been a range of outcomes for where people have left the organisation. There have been sanctions under the Code of Conduct, as well as investigations finding that the allegations haven't been substantiated. So a range across the board.
Okay, who heads the team?
That is headed by our Chief People and Culture Officer.
Chief People. Oh, so there's a couple, it's not one person.
So there is the executive in charge, and then there is a manager in charge of Safe Place.
All right. How were they appointed to the role?
The manager of Safe Place went through a selection exercise because we originally, with Safe Place and as a result of the Broderick review, we went outside of the organisation rather than internal, just to make sure that it was set up appropriately, and that individual that got selected went through a normal selection process and was selected after advertising and...
Selected by staff?
Sorry?
Selected by the staff, not through management as well?
No, it was a normal selection process where I signed off, for example, the individual's recruitment based on a normal recruitment exercise to external staff.
Okay. All right, just a couple of quick ones. How many consultants has Airservices engaged in the last 14 months?
So no, I have to take that on notice.
All right, and if you could, and also the cost too
that
has brought with it. And have you looked at reducing your fees and charges to airlines?
Senator, we have been government subsidised at the moment, reference HR, and it's also part of the fact that the scheme that was talked about previously is the domestic waivers are in there, ensuring that's the case. Yeah.
And which you did say at the COVID aviation inquiry 2 weeks ago. Chair, I know Senator Chisholm has questions. I've got a host of questions. I'm going to put them on notice.
Oh, thank you, Senator
because I want to get
Stell.
back on time.
Thank you, Senator Stell. Senator Chisholm?
Thanks. Questions around Brisbane and the new runway. When did Airservices Australia commence and then finalise the standard terminal arrival route and the standard instrument design, departure design for the new parallel runway integration into the Brisbane Basin airspace?
Senator, I have to take that specifically on notice, but the finalisation of it would have probably been about 12 months before the opening of the runway, which would have been mid last year, so you're probably talking around 2018-19, but I'll correct that if it's not correct.
Yep. And when was the decision made to adopt a closed star model in preference to an open star model utilising radar vectoring to final approach with a dedicated director position?
Senator, I have to take that on notice for the specifics.
But I presume it was in that same time period?
That may have been earlier because it's one of the design principles that across, I'll call it the country, in introducing standard terminal arrival routes, that we try to go where we possibly can to closed stars, is the anacronym forum, which is the only place that has open stars is Sydney Airport.
Okay. Was the closed star model peer reviewed by other airline navigation service provider? And if so, when? And was it after or before the adopted model was selected?
So as I said, closed stars has been a design philosophy that we've had in the airspace for since standard terminal arrival routes were introduced in the mid-90s. But in regards to Brisbane, I would have to take that on notice.
Okay. So you say Open Star is at Sydney Airport, was it?
Sydney has an Open Star.
And is that the only capital city?
To my understanding, is the only capital city where there is an Open Star. The other stars at other routes, so for example Melbourne, are closed star, where they take them all the way to the runway threshold. The difference between an Open Star and a closed star is that the tracking is all the way to the threshold with a closed star. With an Open Star to a certain point, and then the air traffic controller will then vector the aeroplane onto final approach.
Okay. And why was a closed star model chosen? Is it more suitable for Brisbane?
It's what we use across the country, and it's more suitable and it's more predictable and it's better in traffic management overall,
right,
because it allows the air crew to manage the flights all the way to the threshold rather than getting to 20 miles and then not knowing how long they're going to be vector for, how many track miles to run. And when you're trying to manage the aircraft flows, it's a much more efficient way.
And does this mean there would be an increased frequency over a particular geographic area on entry?
Potentially, yes, because on navigating that the aircraft will navigate within closer tolerances rather than being vectored where the tolerances are undefined.
So it potentially would impact the noise of residents under the flight paths?
Yes, yes, it would, in the sense that it would mean that there's more frequency. However, that's balanced with an Open Star environment where you affect more residents as a result of spreading the noise rather than having it in the same place on a regular basis.
What research was conducted amongst other airline navigation service providers about the airspace design models for independent and dependent parallel runways?
So I have to take that on notice.
Okay.
We have had the United Kingdom's National Air Traffic Services come and review them on time to time, but I'd have to take it on notice for the specifics.
Okay. Thanks for that. What input did the Brisbane Airport Corporation provide as far as a preferred model of operation for the use of parallel runways?
Senator, I'd have to take that on notice to go back because, Senator, having parallel runways has been around for Brisbane for sort of 20 years. So that sort of decision was made at that stage. And the difference between dependent and independent parallel runways is the distance between the runways and how they operate. When they are a certain distance apart, such as in Sydney, where it's only about just over a kilometre apart, they have to be operated in what we would call a dependent mode, which means that it's treated like it's one runway. So if you've got aircraft on final, you have to stagger them technically, even though they're on different runways, because it's treated like it's one. When they're independent, it means that you can operate them as two separate runways. And so that's the difference between dependent and independent. So I'd have to go back and check. That's not a recent decision.
Okay. Were consultants used by Airservices Australia in the design of the parallel runway airspace, and were any of the consultants used recent Airservices Australia employees?
Senator, I would have to take that on notice.
Okay. And how does this design process differ from recent development of new airspace?
Senator, can I ask a clarification there? I'm not quite sure.
So in terms of the process that was gone through with Brisbane, and the design process, how would that differ from the development of other new airspace in regards to
flight paths for a runway?
Yeah.
No real difference, Senator.
Okay. So there's a sort of standard process that you would go through?
Yes, which, for clarity's sake, this was the Brisbane runway, because it's been around in the sense, I think the environmental impact statement was done in about 2004, I think it was, because they had to reclaim back out to the bay and the reclaiming there, so that was done earlier. This was our first greenfields new runway in since the Sydney runway in the mid-90s. So it was a process that was conducted through the 2000s and the teens. And the basis of what we've done is that what we're replicating now for the potential new runway in Melbourne, the potential new runway in Perth, as well as for Western Sydney.
Okay. Were other options considered for the parallel runway airspace design?
There most likely would have been, but I'd have to go back and take on notice when and what the considerations were made to end up with the final model.
Okay. Just some operational performance questions. What proportion of flights in the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. overnight period, this is in regards to Brisbane, have been directed over the base since the new runway was opened?
Senator, I have to take the specifics on notice. However, where weather conditions permit, we are trying to do over the bay operations as much as possible, not even just during the nighttime period, but also during the day. Okay.
I've got a series of questions about that are pretty specific. They might be best to be put on notice,
specific
I think,
answers,
if that's yeah. Okay. I'm happy to leave it there.
Thanks, Senator Chisholm. Unless there are any other questions for Air Services, I think we are right to let you go with our thanks.
Thank you very much.